Thank you all for joining us at the 2023 Defense State Liaison Office State of the State Summit, and welcome. I am Patty Barron, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Military, Community, and Family Policy, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about the mission, priorities, recent successes, and future goals of the Defense State Liaison Office, or DSLO. DSLO educates state policymakers on barriers created by state law and recommends policy changes to improve the well-being of our service members and their families. As a former registered nurse, mom, and military spouse of 30 years who moved with the military 14 times, I am here to say thank you to the state and local communities who play an integral role in supporting our military families. I have plenty of exciting new initiatives to catch you up on, all of which contribute to our overall goal of improving quality of life and providing security and prosperity to our service members and military families. Many of the policy priorities I will outline here are continuations of initiatives begun in 2023. Four are new for 2024. You will hear more details later on the DOD state policy initiatives, but let me highlight a few. Because strong, stable families are a crucial element to mission readiness, we want to increase access to quality childcare for military families. We can make it easier for child development centers to gain licensure, reduce wait list times for families, and provide fee assistance. Frequent moves are our standard for military life, and military spouses are often hard-pressed to find quality portable employment. The department, through DSLO, has worked with state policymakers to improve license portability for military spouses. As a result, 37 states have made adjustments to their license requirements to better provide for timely licensure portability. We want to continue these efforts to enhance military spouse employment and economic opportunities, particularly when it comes to state licensure requirements. We are prioritizing educating states on the importance of joining occupational license compacts as the most efficient and timely mechanism to ensure nationwide portability. So far, we have 23 states that have adopted 6 or more compacts. That is great news. Another complication of those frequent moves for military families is finding schools for their children and enrolling them in a timely manner. Educating states on the need to provide open enrollment flexibility will go a long way to easing some educational barriers. We also want to help states expand protections for victims of violence, child abuse, and neglect. States can help by requiring local child protective services to identify military families and develop reporting and information sharing procedures with the department's Family Advocacy Program so that needed support can be provided to families. As you can see, the DSLO has been busy and is critical to the Department of Defense's ongoing efforts to identify and address the most pressing needs of service members and military families. Thank you for continuing to be a partner with the DSLO. Join us in our support of service members by knowing and understanding the DOD state policy priorities that impact the well-being of service members and their families so that we can all work together to help advance the initiatives. We are always very interested in hearing what you are learning from our families that can help us identify future policy priorities. I know that working together, we can be a strong team to help educate states on how they can best assist us in our mission to support our most valuable resource, our service members and their families. Thank you for all you do. We couldn't do it without you.
Thank you to Mrs. Barron. She really keeps us laser focused on the needs of our military families, and her unrelenting energy every day inspires our entire directorate. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. It's exciting to have over 150 plus of our closest DSLO friends. Really what I wanted to do was start for all of you that are out there with the education that we place before our executive branches and the legislative branches about why we're doing what we're doing. We take the quote, "The Department of Defense has a sacred obligation to take care of our service members and families. Doing so is a national security imperative. Our military families provide the strong foundation for our force, and we owe them our full support." From Dr. Jill Biden, we also, "The families of our service members and veteran caregivers and survivors may not wear a uniform, but they sacrifice for all of us. They give their best to the United States, and we owe them nothing but our best in return. And I know for those of you that are with us today, these statements are what compel you not only to join us today and work with us to educate states, but what we need to continually to remind everybody about why we're asking them to make measures a little bit better for our military families to the extent they can change their laws. Next slide. This is the DSLO. Before I start, for those of you that haven't met me, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm the director of the Defense State Liaison Office, also known as the DSLO. I joined the DSLO after serving 12 years as a delegate in the Maryland legislature, and I was privileged to work with the DSLO and sponsor many of the key policy priorities for our families. As a former state legislator in the Maryland House of Delegates, as an attorney and a clinical nurse, I understand the incredible influential impact that state government has on people's personal and professional lives. And I especially understand it has a unique ability to help or hinder a military family's experience at a duty station. The work of the DSLO as the primary point of contact between the DOD and state and local governments is crucial in helping ensure military families have a positive experience in defense communities around the country. It's important as the DSLO engages with the states that we work in conjunction with all of you who have your fingers on the pulse of both our military families, as well as the commanders and installations in each state who can play a pivotal role in messaging the needs of our families to the respective executive branch and legislative branches. I'm thrilled to share both our policy advances from 2023 and our upcoming 2024 policy priorities. And I really intend for this event to open a new, robust line of communication as we gather the needed information to develop our future priorities. Questions will be entertained at the end if you'd like to drop them in the chat with your contact information. And if we don't get to all of them today, please know that we will respond with an answer. So the Defense State Liaison, we provide expert insight on issues affecting military families. And this is the part of the Defense Department's effort to identify and address the most pressing needs of our service members and families. Next slide. Functionally, as the liaisons are out there working across the country, they help establish state-specific priorities. They offer insights into military life and issues that impact military families, and they provide assistance with testimony and legislation on the state policy priorities. Next slide. Now let's meet the regional liaisons. This is what I refer to as the special ops team at DOD that serves on behalf of our military families. First, we have Tammy Perot. She's our Northwest Regional Liaison. She was an Army combat veteran, a military spouse, and a parent. We have Kelly Douglas. She's our Pacific Southwest Liaison. Kelly often self-refers to herself as a Marine brat, a military spouse, and she was a USMC school liaison. Jeremy Hilton is our South Central Liaison. He was a Navy submariner, an Air Force Academy grad, and he was former military spouse of the year. And I do understand he may have been the first male to make military spouse of the year. Shane Preston is our Great Lakes Regional Liaison. He's an attorney and a former USMC combat veteran. Michelle Richard is our Midwest Liaison. She's an attorney, a military spouse, and a parent. Melissa Willett is our New England Liaison. She's in the Air National Guard and a military spouse and parent. Chris Arnold, our Mid-Atlantic Liaison, is an Army combat veteran. And Eric Sherman from our Southeast region is our Senior Liaison, what we refer to as our last remaining plank builder, and he was a Navy flight physiologist. You can see that each of the liaisons cover 6 or more states, and they also act as an issue lead for a particular policy priority. So out there, for those of you, if you have a dedicated team working in areas related to one of our priorities, we want to open the aperture for future meetings and more in-depth briefings as needed, and I'll connect you with the issue contact, so get in touch with me. My team is extraordinarily talented, but they cannot yet teleport themselves to the vast geography that they represent. So it's going to be very beneficial for us to coordinate with you on our priorities in each state and look for our potential synergies so that we can all accomplish our mutual goals for military families. Next slide. This is our progress report for what transpired in 2023. The vast majority of the states have adjourned their 2023 legislative sessions. What you'll see at the bottom is we passed 106 initiatives in the different states. Don't need to go through all of this, but I think it's important that you see emeritus priorities at the top means that we continue to work in the states on issues that we've been carrying around for years, to the extent all of the 50 states didn't finish them. So you may often be referred to that we're working on the top 10, but we really are always working on a vast array of issues for our families. Enhanced military spouse portability, that is one of the premier policies that we work on for spouse employment, really in suggesting to the states that they issue a license to a spouse in no less than 30 days. We have 37 states that have adopted that policy, and we're going to be really leaning in now on the remainder states to figure out how we can get them to adopt that 30-day policy. Military anti-family discrimination, we just started. You'll hear more about that. I think what you'll see on this is the vast majority of the work that we do comes with our licensing compacts, and thus far we've completed 53. Our Purple Star program is at saturation at 38, and we will be retiring that program this year. The other next big one, I'm not going to go through all of them. You can see the chart. Child abuse identification and reporting. We've been working on that for many years. We're at 33 states. So we're going to lean in this year and try and figure out what we can do with the standout states. And we'll ask any of you out there that have a great interest in this to get in touch with me, and we can work collectively on the education measures that we're using. So with that, 106 policies for 2023. Next slide. This is just a summary of the licensing compacts for those of you that are watching and following in particular areas. You'll see that really what we have emerging for 2024 are school psychologists, dietitians, and then late in 2024, respiratory therapists. One of the most exciting measures was the Interstate Teaching Mobility Compact. In its first year, reached the number 10, which is the magic number needed so that the compact commission can now start to be developed and work towards that compact being an active compact. Next slide. This really gives an illustration of the DSLO and its dedication to the Department of Defense priorities. So the Department of Defense defend the homeland by supporting the warfighter. You'll see that we're out there and we'll be working to get military community representation on state boards and councils, and we'll be working on defining the armed forces. When we talk about the importance to deter aggression by protecting personnel and installations, that's where we're going to be working with concurrent juvenile jurisdiction and the state response to military interpersonal violence. Building a resilient force in a defense ecosystem. This is where we work on our child abuse identification and reporting, our military family anti-discrimination, and our state support for military families with special education needs. And then in expanding America's prosperity. That's our military access to quality childcare and spouse employment and economic opportunities and open enrollment. So I think that helps or lets you visualize when we define our priorities and when they're approved for us by the Department of Defense, it's because they're going to have an impact on the big pillars for our defense system. Next slide. Here's a kind of snapshot of the pictures to show you a little bit about where we're going in 2024 and to show you that you can go to the State Policy Military OneSource website. And when you click on these particular policy priorities, you will see a more in-depth description and you will see some best practices for the various states. So we really encourage you to use our State Policy Military OneSource. Next slide. All right, this is the first new policy priority that we're advancing, state response to military interpersonal violence. Really, the establishment of the 90-day Independent Review Commission on Sexual Assault in the Military provided the Department of Defense a set of comprehensive and actionable recommendations to improve the department's approach in 4 lines of effort: accountability, prevention, climate, culture, and victim care and support. States can expand protection for victims of interpersonal violence by enacting best practices that improve the coordinated community response to physical, verbal, sexual, emotional, and psychological abuse and harassment. Through the implementation of interpersonal violence policies, we can empower victims, deter offenders, and create an environment for military families that's conducive to resilience and readiness. IPV is a pattern of behavior that can take several forms, including physical, emotional, sexual, economic, verbal, and psychological abuse. Both civilian and military authorities are involved in addressing domestic violence cases. And we're committed to educating the states that the military is committed to responding to reports of interpersonal violence in a timely manner. We know the impact of interpersonal violence extends beyond the individual victim, and it can also undermine the mission readiness of our military units and compromise national security. Expanding protections for victims ensures service members and their families have the support they need to overcome this challenge. And next slide. These are the different areas that we'll be asking the states and educating the states to work on us. They can expand the legal authority of military commanders and military protective orders beyond military locations and duty times. They can choose to allow state courts to recognize a special victims counsel to assist victims of abuse and harassment. We can mandate that states allow victims access to post-discharge travel funds to fully cover the expense of traveling to and from and participating in court proceedings. States can amend their domestic violence definitions to include coercive control, emotional distress, and psychological abuse. They can allow victims of military sexual trauma or interpersonal violence to appear virtually in court proceedings. Next slide. The next new policy priority that we'll be advancing is state support for military families with special education needs. For those of you that may have grown up in the 60s or 70s, or if you're as old as me, you may remember that children with disabilities haven't always had access to public school systems. In passing the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Congress clearly stated, disability is a natural part of the human experience, and in it no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. Improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy of ensuring quality and equality and opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. And while we've made great strides over the last 50 years, a military family's mobile lifestyle can still significantly impact a child's receipt of services under our nation's disability education laws. According to a 2021 study of military parents raising children with special education needs, 31% indicated that their children with disabilities went without services for more than 60 days following a military move, and 42% reported that their individualized education plan was not implemented as written once they arrived at their new duty station. For many military children receiving special education services, COVID also exacerbated what was already a system with some deficits for these children. Next slide. A state's education system plays an integral part in supporting our military kids impacted by disabilities. You'll see in our best practices document for this issue that a number of states have already enacted various improvements to state education statutes, building upon the existing disability education requirements. Our ask of states is to utilize some of these best practices already in existence to streamline the process of transferring special education plans, to minimize educational loss, and to increase the access to the procedural safeguards of the IDA. The regional liaisons will be partnering with installation personnel like school liaisons and other state level agencies and organizations who are already working with and advancing these types of issues for families. And we will be looking for any of you out there that have a particular interest in this as we're merging this new policy priority to get in touch with us. Next slide. The third new issue that we'll be advancing in 2024 is military community representation on state boards. By including members of the military community, states can ensure that unique operational requirements and military family priorities are considered across pertinent policy areas. We will be looking at states, and to the extent any of you may be members of some or aware of any, we'll be looking to include military connected representation on applicable state boards and councils. That will be where a state may have a board related to either suicide prevention, health improvement boards, or occupational licensing boards. We will also look at the already existing military connected representation on statewide defense focus boards that serve as a resource for state policymakers, and look to suggest whether there's a need to add a military spouse or a member of the National Guard or reserves. And then we'll look at states who have already allocated some existing resources to staff and see whether or not we can work with them to have additional family liaisons or advisors to such boards. Next slide. Military family anti-discrimination. This was an issue that we piloted in 2023. And this came because of the Department of Defense. Under its big plays for 2023, there was a priority to change the culture. And this was to ensure service members and families are protected through state implemented anti-discrimination measures. We want to protect against bias and discrimination in such matters as employment, housing, and education. In 2023, we tracked and sought out sponsors to introduce state legislation to amend discrimination statutes, adding military status as a protected class, and a policy priority piloted, resulted in a few, but we'll really be looking to work with all of you out there and with the states to amend some of the existing discrimination laws to make sure they apply not just to veterans, but to military families. Next slide. This is one that we've been continuing and working on for many, many years: military spouse employment and economic opportunity. The new federal SACRA provisions are intended to help with licensure portability, but these are federal provisions, and the DSLO cannot provide states with opinions or advice on how to implement the new provisions. Only the state's attorneys and DOJ have authority to interpret and enforce the federal provisions. These provisions are well intended to allow a spouse with orders who has practiced in the last 2 years, is in good standing, who's moving because of military orders to practice in a different state, it will not require the state to issue a license, but only to accept the fact that the spouse can practice in that state. Only time will tell us if employers are going to accept the provisions or if they are going to begin to require that the spouse actually apply for a state license. So to the extent that any of you are working with spouses or in this arena, learn information about any spouses struggling in this area, or where employers are requiring that they still seek state licensure, please get in touch with us. The exchange of information is going to be very important. We will then continue to focus on the states to ensure that they do have the 30-day timely licensure policies in place. Next slide. Oh, well, I want to talk about compacts before I go into this slide, sorry. The DSLO has a long-standing effort of working in compacts. It dates back to 2006 with the development of the Interstate Compact on Educational Opportunity for Military Children. And compacts provide the most effective means for relieving the burdens of maintaining multi-state licenses for military spouses. Through licensure compacts, states establish uniform standards which help expedite and increase efficiencies for multi-state practice while preserving a state's practice and respecting state sovereignty. Licensure compacts also enhance public protection through a data system that allows member states to efficiently communicate licensure data, including disciplinary actions against licensees. Licensure compacts are developed through an extensive stakeholder-informed and consensus-based process from existing policy and stakeholders across the country. As you know, the NDAA had the Department of Defense enter into a cooperative agreement to develop 10 occupational licensure compacts. To date, 5 compacts have been finalized under the cooperative agreement and are available for adoption. We've been working on the teaching one, which I told you, 10 states so far, but we really, on behalf of the education community, want to see that really get blown out across the country, because we're going to bring that one up as fast as we can. Now we'll talk about defining armed forces in state policy. The restructuring changed the definition. We added in Space Force, and a lot of states have existing definitions on their books for defining an armed force. And we're going through each of the states and making sure that they appropriately include Space Force and that they are appropriately aligned with some of the federal definitions so that all of the military families can ignore the benefits that the state wants to provide pursuant to the definition. Next slide. This is continuing our open enrollment flexibility. To reduce barriers in this, where families are transferring back and forth, under this policy priority, we have 3 different things that we ask state to do. We ask them to use a military clause. This provision in their state statute would increase military family access to interdistrict and intra-district transfers. The next thing we do is we might ask states to put a placement stability provision in. This policy allows a military child to enroll and attend school outside of the zoned area of their temporary lodging and housing. Or we can ask states to have a military priority category. This mitigates the lack of access to inter and intrastate transfer programs. To date, 12 states have either met or partially met our objective, and 3 states still have active legislation. The success of this initiative relies strongly on collaboration with and support of installation commands, advocacy groups, and school liaisons who understand the challenges military families face in accessing these programs, and they have established relationships with a lot of the education agencies. So those of you, I see some things popping in chat on this being important. Please know that we're working on this and that we want to gather our synergies together in the various states and regions with you on this. Next slide. Military access to quality childcare. This is a problem across the nation for both civilians and the military. But what we're asking is states to recognize the military family child care certificate in lieu of requiring the state to issue a license. This will allow the mainly military spouses to transfer and begin to immediately continue what may have been their small business of childcare. We're going to also ask states to support military childcare in your neighborhood plus, and that's really going to help increase access for active duty and National Guard. Next. We're continuing with child abuse identification and reporting. Federal law requires the Defense Department to request state reports regarding instances of child abuse and neglect involving military family members. States can assist military family advocacy programs in providing needed support by requiring Child Protective Services to report cases to the military at their onset. And this really does allow the flow of information. When I worked on this bill in Maryland, to make sure that the family advocacy program resources become immediately available to the military family, not only help the child, but the adult members, and ensure that as the family transfers, that they're able to continue with those supports that are absolutely necessary to help protect the children and ensure the well-being of the family. Next. Concurrent juvenile jurisdiction. The DSLO effort toward concurrent juvenile jurisdiction involves setting the conditions for success by removing barriers in state laws to the transfer of jurisdiction between the federal government, because the federal government lacks appropriate juvenile resources. And we can then get resources from the juveniles, the youth court, to help address juvenile misconduct. Our legislative approach ensures that retrocession of juvenile jurisdiction is available at every installation in a state, as well as an alternative mechanism to waive jurisdiction on subject matter or case-by-case basis when retrocession has not occurred. The DSLOs invested over $2 million in developing a state-of-the-art juvenile jurisdiction information system. Additionally, once this system is launched, it will be launched with our knowledge development report. And this will be the first comprehensive jurisdictional inventory of federal property since the Eisenhower report in over, I guess, 62 years. These reports have already borne fruit in 6 states. And during the 2024 legislative session for juvenile jurisdiction, the military services have requested we prioritize Kentucky, Alabama, Colorado, Arizona, and Texas, although we expect many more across the nation. We know that with concurrent juvenile jurisdiction, when I was a legislator, this can be a complicated issue, but it is something that Congress has made the decision to ensure that juvenile jurisdiction is available, and it can only be available through this measure because it's only federal authority on the installations, and they do not have juvenile jurisdiction resources. So anyone out there that's working or interested in this, please get in touch with us. So what I'd like to say for the DSLO is my very favorite quote is Maya Angelou's. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And the DSLO wants to go far on these policy priorities, and we want to work with you. So now I don't have access to the chat box. There may be some questions in the chat box. I think Kelly or Tammy may bring up some that they want me to answer now. Just know that we really need you to partner with us. We want to strengthen our teamwork with you to help this mission for our most valuable resource, our service members and our military families. So we stand ready to be partners with you. Do we have anything in the chat or most assuredly, please use this. I guess you can hover your phone over it, right?
Yeah.
And get straight to our state policy military one source. That way you'll know how to get in touch with us. You'll see some of the best practices and you'll have our website ready and handy.
Geraldine, I think I'm gonna start with a question that seems like it's on a few folks' minds, and that is a question about the alignment with the Air Force scorecard. Would you like to address that?
Okay, I will tell you a little bit about the scorecard. We at the Defense State Liaison Office filled out an objective sheet of information for each state. And it was the status of the statutes as they existed for portability, accessibility, and the status of compacts that have been passed. So no interpretation of implementation of any of the laws for the state, but just the statutory status for the state for both of those issues, portability, accessibility, and compacts. And then we provided that survey for each state to the Air Force, and they did use that, I believe, as part of their data source. Each of the military departments created their own methodology on how they would look at the information on portability, but we did provide that set of objective data to the Air Force. I think, does that answer the question?
Geraldine, that seems spot on. And the person that asked the question is in touch with their RL already. So I think that we can easily do some follow-up. Thanks so much.
Anything else out there? If I can give you go ahead. Kelly, you got something for me?
Sorry. Yes, just a couple of questions. One was a question regarding, and I think it's a good opportunity for you to share in a little more detail about how we approach emeritus issues, but a question about why we have archived the Purple Star schools for 2024.
Usually we archive once we get to what we think is saturation of a majority of the states. And on that one, going back, we have over 30 something states, 38 states. So once we get there, it makes room then on our policy priorities for the newer ones, which you saw: interpersonal violence and the children that need special needs in schools and the discrimination issue that's emerging. So it doesn't mean that we still won't be working on it, but it really opens up room for us to focus on some heavier policy priorities that are deemed important for our military families and allows us then to continue to work on those other states, but dedicate resources to some new emerging policies.
Wonderful. Thank you, Geraldine. There is a couple more questions, if you don't mind. And then
Sure.
I wanted to remind everyone that we will follow up also offline with more detailed responses to some of the questions that are more complex. Geraldine, there's a question about special education. I think I can answer that. For special education in local public schools, a request for IEP, identification of highly mobile student status, and 30-day timeline for newly identified students with disabilities. That is definitely one part of our ask. The special education priority does have a variety of approaches that states can take to reduce burdens and minimize delays. Thank you for that question. Kathy Fasson with DODIA asked if there's an opportunity for the community to be a part of the development of the key priority. I don't know if you maybe want to talk a little bit about that process, Geraldine.
So when we develop our key priorities, it is through the work of the liaisons in each of the regions and what they're hearing from their communities, from their military families, and what they're seeing evolve in the various state legislators. So it's at that point that we work and send out to all of the military departments and all the military services who also work with the communities and the families to get back to us what they think is a policy priority. And we have a significant, sophisticated system where there's a lot of rating of the policy priorities. And we take a serious look at it. It does take almost a year. So yes to DODIA. Through that process, we do believe, in conjunction with the work that the liaisons do in their regions and then the work that the military departments do with their communities, that we do receive input and certainly are always open. That's what this is for, to open the lines of communication on what we do and how we develop our policy priorities going forward.
And then I saw a question about local MOUs as a possibility for addressing open enrollment flexibility. And Geraldine, I thought that was a good sample question for you to address as well, because many of our issues, there would be an opportunity to resolve the problem at a local level, but I thought maybe you could explain why we kind of our approach as far as this a statewide approach.
So thank you. And as a former legislator, this is a very special one and dear to me in terms of the practice that we have at the DSLO, which is that for the legislators, that is their call out to the state. It is their call out to say, here's a policy, we're enacting it. It ends up in what we call the statutes and the books, and it clearly expresses the policy and the intent of the policy. So that no matter who comes along, we get elected, unelected, people change positions, new directors come in or go to different agencies, that there's no discretion left because the policy is considered that important for vulnerable children, for school children, and for military families. And that is why we ask that the statutes get changed and amended so that it goes on and on as a policy and is not subject to changes because of changes in characters and personalities.
Thank you, Geraldine. Is there anyone, I think, Tammy, were you able to track any other questions that might be appropriate for the whole team?
I don't think I have any more. There's a few questions in the Q&A section that I'm getting back to right now. And I just want to thank everybody for, all of these wonderful questions. And I'm looking forward to answering more of them.
Thank you. And so I did get, prior to this, for those of you that are still on, last night in my box, a couple people were asking for really an update on where we are. And so our resources and oversight directorate this morning said that for those of you that are out there, I can pass on with respect to the 2024 appropriations and what's happening. Last night, the House passed its version of the Defense Appropriations Bill, HR 4365. The bill narrowly passed along party lines and really has no chance of being adopted in the Senate. Speaker McCarthy plans to introduce a CR later today. However, he probably doesn't have the votes or the time to get it passed by Saturday night, and it also may have very little chance in the Senate. With respect to the Senate, the next procedural vote on the Senate drafted CR would happen on Saturday, unless they can get enough votes up to speed today on the process. And there are already some senators who have said that they won't speed the process up. And the House has already said that they wouldn't support the continuing resolution. So I did get a couple of these questions in my box last night. Thought it was important to give you the latest update. And what that does mean is that if there is a government shutdown, that the Defense State Liaison Office will not be able to continue any of its work with the states. It will not have access to its government cell phones or its government computer. And what we'll do then is ask when we restart to get back in touch with each other, but realize together and collectively we'll have a lot of ground to make up if the shutdown does continue for a significant amount of time. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Tammy and Kelly out there that we will respond to you. Again, this is the beginning of our working relationship going into 2024 and working with the states. You know how to find us, you know how to get in touch with us. And we look forward to the fact that we all took this job. We all tuned in today for our mission, our one mission, our military families and their children. So thank you. Have a good day, everybody. I saw Ohio sending some love. Thank you.
Everyone.